Someone in our chat room says, Derrick Broze, yes. Yes, Derrick Broze is up next. So why are so many people, the freedom-loving Americans right now, seemingly like turning a blind eye to the massive surveillance state in the United States of America, which could be rolled out with all of these sort of tech oligarchs? Remember, all of them were like standing behind President Trump during the inauguration, and we're sort of praising Elon Musk on one hand for all of this uncovering at Doge, but are we turning a blind eye? Are we missing something here? Do we have a massive blind spot when it comes to the technocratic move and a massive surveillance state which could be rolled out in the United States? Derrick Broze, investigative journalist, does a fantastic job. He writes at the American Vagabond. He's here, and of course he's been covering this story for years, and we wanted to invite him on. He's got a couple of new articles out right now. Derrick, welcome back to the show. Great to see you.
Hey guys, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Our pleasure. So what's your biggest concern right now as you look at the sort of technocratic landscape and this massive sort of biosurveillance state, which seems to be creeping its way into our lives?
Yeah, so over the last 2.5 months, I've written 3 articles at the Last American Vagabond, each of them kind of picking at this story. The first one you alluded to, Clayton, was focused on Elon Musk's contract. It's a $1.8 billion classified contract with a project called Starshield, which is basically the military industrial complex intelligence network side of Starlink. Most people know Starlink is the internet, satellite internet company that allows you to access internet pretty much anywhere in the world. And it's done some great things, helping people in disaster situations, as well as people in very low bandwidth areas. But as I said, there's another angle to that. And that is that every time Elon Musk sends up one of those Falcon rockets and people celebrate the space race has begun again, he's actually also sending out classified payloads for most likely the National Reconnaissance Office, which is the U.S. government agency that was secret up until the early 90s, which deals with satellites and surveillance from satellites. And so SpaceX has partnered with the military, and the Starshield program is about creating the world's largest spy satellite network. And in my article at thelastamericans.com, I mentioned the head of the NRO, his name's Christopher Scalise. He actually gave a talk in late 2024 where he said, in his own words, quote, "You can't hide." Now, of course, he was referencing bad guys, terrorists, only criminals, and saying that that's what this is going to focus on. But I think it's something that many people may have overlooked as far as some of the things, like you said, people are celebrating with Doge and others, that Elon Musk is still a military industrial complex contractor, one of the largest. And in fact, another sort of related story I've reported on is that OpenAI, Anduril, which is connected to Peter Thiel, and SpaceX have all announced a coalition, a new kind of alliance coming together, where they're saying they want to compete directly with the old guard of the military industrial complex. This would be Raytheon, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, and others like that. And I'm afraid that we're going to see a sort of inversion where all of a sudden it becomes cool to become a military industrial complex contractor because it's Elon and because he's aligned with Trump and we're doing all this cool stuff and Doge and et cetera. And so many people maybe are just not ready to see what's really going on, is that these same technocrats, the Peter Thiels, who has at least a dozen people in Trump's new administration, all going back to the PayPal mafia, Elon Musk, of course, David Sachs, Peter Thiel, and connected to the Bilderberg Group. Peter Thiel is a steering committee member of the Bilderberg Group, as well as his co-founder at Palantir, Alex Karp, that people might be missing these details, if not purposely trying to ignore them.
Or is there perhaps this bait and switch where Democrats, which are part of something you talk about all the time as part of the Uniparty, are saying, well, our data is being looked at by Elon Musk in this sort of paper and pen type of way, but what they're missing and what they may be on board with is a different kind of data surveillance that they're not warning about, because they could raise this legitimate point, but instead they're raising just crap.
I agree. That's a great point, Natalie. And this is, I think, just sort of the standard for the mainstream world of politics, that they find certain things to focus on and to bicker about and to get people arguing about at work and online, when there's these deeper issues sort of going on behind the scenes. And on the surface level, it would appear as if there is a left wing or a progressive and now a more conservative leaning element of the big tech industry of Silicon Valley. So you have people like former CEO of Google, Eric Schmidt, and others who've pretty much always been progressives donating to them, and they supported Kamala Harris. And you have now more conservative leaning big tech bros supporting Trump, obviously. And this really came about in the last year when many of them held a fundraiser at David Sacks' home in June 2024 in San Francisco. And this is where actually, according to several reports, that Elon Musk and several people in that circle told Donald Trump that J.D. Vance should be his vice presidential candidate. And of course, J.D. Vance is one of these acolytes of Peter Thiel, who was largely funded and won his Senate race because of Peter Thiel's money, and who has said that when he heard Peter Thiel speak at Yale, that was like a big inspirational moment for him. They started working and collaborating together. But nevertheless, on this surface, it appears there's this progressive and more conservative leaning. So that's one angle people could take. But I think if you peel back a layer, you actually realize, oh, well, although Google's Eric Schmidt is supporting Kamala Harris, he's actually a steering committee member of the Bilderberg Group, as well as Peter Thiel. So you have one steering committee member of the Bilderberg Group supporting Trump, one member supporting Harris in the 2024 election. And when it's all said and done, though, they're both sort of aiming in the same direction. I think that's really what people should take note of as well. I mean, we had the Stargate project announcement. I know you guys reported on that. And for those who missed it, I mean, I wrote an article about that as well. You can look more into Larry Ellison, look more into Sam Altman, and what these people are about. These are the men sitting shoulder to shoulder with Donald Trump as they announce AI, mRNA cancer vaccines that are allegedly going to solve cancer. But you go back to Larry Ellison's January 2002 opinion piece for the New York Times, written just months after 9/11, and he was calling for a complete surveillance state, calling for biometrics, calling for a national ID card, a digital ID card, in the very this is 20 years ago and we're pretty close now, but he's been advocating for these ideas for some time, and more recently speaking about the use of AI and facial recognition to keep citizens on their best behavior. And so these are the people that he's, of course, the head of Oracle, and Sam Altman over at OpenAI right now under investigation for their whistleblower allegedly having killed himself, despite signs to the contrary of that. And these are the kind of people that are partnering with Trump to the tune of $500 billion for this new Stargate project. And in addition to what I mentioned, that there's at least a dozen Peter Thiel acolytes in the current Trump administration. I know you guys had Whitney Webb, and she spoke about Jim O'Neill at the HHS, but that's really just one piece of it. I touched on J.D. Vance. There's obviously David Sacks, who's going back to the PayPal mafia. He was the crypto and AI czar. You got Howard Lutnick, and the Commerce Secretary. He is connected to Peter Thiel as well as funding Rumble, and Cantor Fitzgerald. He was also a neighbor of Jeffrey Epstein at one point. And the list goes on. And there's also Ken Howry. I'll just mention him. One last thing on him. I think he's an important piece of this puzzle as well. He was appointed to ambassador to Denmark, and some people are like, okay, big deal. Peter Thiel acolyte is being the ambassador to Denmark. He has no power, no influence. He didn't just work with Peter Thiel one time, though. He was part of his fellowship, part of the Thiel Foundation and organizations like that. But when you put this into context of Trump's calls for wanting to purchase or take Greenland and make it part of the United States, Greenland is under the Kingdom of Denmark. So Ken Howry, this Peter Thiel acolyte and associate, is now in a position to help negotiate or try to make that happen if that's really what Trump wants. And the other important piece of that is that if you go back to the original Technocrats plan from the 1930s, the original Technocracy movement, which said that we shouldn't have the political class, we shouldn't have the business class, that we should have technologists and engineers and the scientific elite basically micromanaging society using the machines, or what we would call AI now. Their original plan called for the tech native North America, and this included the United States, Canada, Panama, and Greenland. So what Trump is calling for is, in fact, very, very similar to what we heard almost 100 years ago from the original Technocrat movement.
I mean, you've talked about in your piece, really, and I think if people are sitting there saying, wait a second, this sounds crazy, just look at what's happening right now with the border wall and the idea that we will build some sort of a biometric border wall to keep people out. And it'll be done. This is how it always works, though, right? This is like Gattaca. Yeah, but this is how it always works. After 9/11, the Patriot Act, it's for your safety, they tell us, right? So you need to give up your civil liberties. You need to take off your shoes at the airport. And now everything will be scanned. You'll have a biometric system that the federal government will run. And Peter Thiel at Palantir and these guys, these acolytes, are going to be controlling all of this data and information. You have nothing to worry about. I mean, that seems to be what's happening.
Yeah, and I was listening to the show earlier, guys, and obviously, I think anybody here in this audience knows that there is and has been a border issue for some time. So I don't want to discount that in any way. And I'm not, someone who advocates for just open borders and the policies we've had. But I think, unfortunately, we're in a situation where this predator class, they often set up situations like this where we're in the rock and a hard place. So if we do nothing and just let our bleeding hearts lead the way, well, then we end up with the country being flooded with people who have ill intent and who are not here to do good things. And at the same time, the solution that's being presented is, as you touched on, Clayton, as I mentioned in my article, this biometric or virtual wall, which is being funded by Peter Thiel's companies and others. And it was something that's not just Trump. This was going on during the Biden administration as well. And the discussion of this also went back to the Obama administration. Trump himself has already said there's going to be a biometric entry and exit process. This discussion about fixing the border crisis, or let's say solving voting, is unfortunately going to play right into the hands of the people who want to promote digital IDs, who want to promote facial recognition everywhere and AI. And it's going to be sold as the way to secure the elections, the way to secure the border, to keep us safe. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't act or do anything in any way, but I do think we ought to be careful in the solutions that are being put in front of us and making sure we're not actually cheering for and celebrating our own enslavement.
Well, even if you want to say this sounds crazy, you can then refer to J.D. Vance's speech today in France at an AI conference where he said that America is open for business with EU leaders to create AI, and they need to build trust in order to share this data. So that validates what you just said. And it sounds a lot to me like globalism 2.0. It's a revamp of globalism.
Just run by technocrats.
Yeah.
I definitely do worry that that's the case, and I do encourage people, just for anybody who is interested in diving deeper into this, you can download my book for free. It's called How to Opt Out of the Technocratic State at theconsciousresistance.com/how-to. And I did want to mention just briefly, guys, because y'all have had me on in the past to talk about the Pyramid of Power documentary series, and I know there was discussion about U.S. aid and the non-NGOs and the role that they play. If that's new to anybody who's just sort of learning about this through the recent U.S. aid information we're getting, there is, I think it's chapter 12 of the Pyramid of Power is about the foundations and the original investigations going back to the 40s, which old school researcher, historian G. Edward Griffin was really the first person and the only person at the time to report on back in the 50s, where they discovered the influence of the Ford Foundation and many of these other NGOs and nonprofits. And it's sometimes known as the nonprofit industrial complex as well. So if anybody wants to dive deeper into the history of that, you can find that at thepyramidofpower.net.
Yeah, someone in the chat said, yeah, this is weird. Yeah, it is weird. Because once you start peeling the onion back, as we've been doing here on the show for many, many years, and as Derrick has been doing in his great reporting for many, many, many years, you realize how deep and dark this stuff actually is. So that's why we need to hold them accountable. And I think just not sitting there with rose-colored glasses. It's great what we're uncovering with Doge. Oh, but we're also going to be biometrically scanned every time we go anywhere, and the government or these technocrats are going to run a database of our information.
We hated that under the pandemic in the Biden administration, and then like it.
Right. That's what pisses me off. I think that's really what pisses me off from a lot of conservatives right now, who I don't know. They're just kind of quiet on this. They're just totally quiet on this particular issue.
Well, that's what's called the woke right. Right? Is like
they're pissed off during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And now they're quiet.
Except for when it's their team. When it's their team, it's okay. Yeah, I think that speaks to the importance of consistency. And just anybody out there, don't be in a cult, whether that's a Trump cult, a Harris cult, Biden, Obama, or anybody. Follow the truth where it leads. I think this is something more of us need to remember, that this isn't team sport politics, that we cheer it on when it's our side and we condemn it when it's the other side. Unfortunately, I think things are a bit deeper than that. And I hope more people will continue to have that skepticism. My feeling has been that in these initial few weeks of the Trump administration, there will be some easy wins, some things that I've celebrated, like the freeing of Ross Ulbricht. Obviously, if the JFK files reveal more things, I'll celebrate all those things. But I worry that while those sort of easy wins, which really honestly don't require a lot of political capital or effort from Trump or his team, that in the background, Stargate's being built, the Starshield program's being built, Peter Thiel's acolytes are getting into their place, calls for Greenland, things that mimic the original technocracy movement are moving into action. And so I hope that people will stay skeptical.
Exactly right.
We need a new shirt that says that. Stay skeptical, my friends.
Constant vigilance was the Thomas Jefferson quote, right? The price of freedom is constant vigilance. So you can't just pick a side and be like, I'm over here. I'm good with everything over here. So we know Derrick Broze, he has no sides, only the truth. So he's one of the best investigative journalists out there. Make sure you follow him on X. Can we put his super up there one more time? Because I don't know it offhand. Derrick Broze. There it is.
D Broze, live free.
All right.
Derrick, great to see you. Thanks, Derrick.